Entrevistas, cubrimientos y mucho más aquí en Zona Captiva. Escúchanos y míranos en todas las plataformas digitales como Zona Captiva. Visítanos y síguenos en nuestras redes sociales como @Zona Captiva y en nuestra página web www.zonacaptiva.com.
Brasileiros, sus amigos do Brasil. É um prazer para mim cumprimentar vocês desde o México, cumprimentar a todos os amigos de Latinoamérica. A gente está agora reunida para falar de uma história bem importante que pode transformar muitas vidas e pode também ajudar sobretudo, muitas crianças para ter uma realidade bem mais segura. So if you are all ready, it is my pleasure to say hello to Maria, Dr. Maria Noel. She is a woman that I have the privilege to know. She is the Regional Director of UN Women for the Americas and the Caribbean. And, she's been working very hard to, promote gender equality and empowerment of women. So, María, it is my pleasure to welcome you today. Es un placer poderte saludar, querida María. Mencionaba yo al inicio que esta es una historia que puede salvar a muchos menores. Y es que está basada en un caso real que es pues, desgarrador y justamente involucra a una niña que fue abusada sexualmente durante años. Ayúdanos a dimensionar esta problemática y por qué es importante que se hable sobre abuso sexual y por qué nos toca compartir información para evitar que haya abusos sexuales en contra de los menores. ¿Cuál es el panorama para Latinoamérica en este rubro, María?
Hola, muchísimas gracias y muchísimas gracias a NBC Universal por la invitación. Es un honor para mí estar aquí hoy con ustedes para compartir en esta historia tan impresionante que van a estar mostrando. Y bueno, saludo muy especial a Jan Brober y también a Nick Antosca. Para mí, verdaderamente, como mujeres, es el trabajo nuestro de todos los días, evitar que se expanda la violencia contra mujeres y niñas y adolescentes y sobre todo hacer visible la violencia que está ocurriendo para que la gente sepa lo que está pasando. Por eso celebro que NBC, que Universal hayan tomado este tema tan importante para hacer esta miniserie que va a tener un éxito muy, muy importante. Nosotros creemos que la violencia contra mujeres y niñas sigue siendo una de las violaciones de derechos humanos más frecuentes y también más generalizadas, lamentablemente, en el mundo. De manera que la historia de Jan no es una historia aislada. Entre 6 y 8 de cada 10 adolescentes y mujeres han sido víctimas o han experimentado algún episodio de violencia por razones de género en distintos ámbitos de su vida. Considerando estudios de violencia de todos nuestros países, vemos que hay 4.000 mujeres por año que mueren por el solo hecho de ser mujeres en feminicidios. Y esto es una realidad, lamentablemente, de nuestra región. Estamos muy de cerca observando dónde están estas mujeres. Son 11 mujeres por día en México, 9 mujeres por día en Brasil, solo por el hecho de ser mujeres. Y la muerte ocurre con los más allegados en la familia y también en sus propias comunidades, en sus propios vecindarios. Específicamente, en 3 de los 11 países de América Latina, la proporción de violencia sexual durante la niñez ya supera el 12%. Esto es totalmente inadmisible. Tanto UNICEF como nosotros estamos trabajando para terminar con este flagelo. Se debería cambiar la idea de que las mujeres y las niñas están completamente seguras en sus casas. Lo que necesitamos es establecer prevención, establecer avisos para que estos temas de violencia no ocurran. Que por supuesto el Estado tenga a su disposición maneras de prevención de esta violencia. Es importante entender que la violencia basada en género ocurre de manera sistemática. No es el resultado de actos aleatorios, sino que es el resultado de estar en la propia familia. Entonces, por eso tenemos que estar muy, muy alarmados de que esta realidad siga existiendo. No sé si me escuchan o hay una interferencia.
Te escuchamos perfectamente, María.
Perfecto.
Y
a nivel nacional, los países asignan muy pocos recursos. Por eso es tan importante que sigamos insistiendo que la prevención de la violencia también necesita recursos y que necesitamos también que se mejoren y se generen entornos seguros para evitar estos conflictos y para evitar que existen estas violaciones, estas agresiones sexuales. Estoy convencida que el cine, que la televisión y los medios de comunicación desempeñan un papel crucial en la visibilización de las experiencias que tienen lamentablemente algunas mujeres y algunas niñas. Por eso celebro que estén realizando esta serie. Es importante tratar las historias y abordar las historias para que este conocimiento de lo que pasa se promueva, se respete y se entienda que así es como se dan muchas veces las agresiones sexuales. Es necesario visibilizar que las mujeres y las niñas llevan consigo el potencial para la generación de nuevas dinámicas sociales. Y eso es lo que hoy ustedes están contribuyendo, a que haya prevención y a que haya una dinámica distinta para salvar a esas niñas y a esas mujeres de esta violencia. Es hora de cambiar las normas sociales y masculinidades dañinas que no solo reproduzcan estos tipos de violencia, sino que se normalicen. Basta de violencia. Muchísimas gracias, les deseo un gran éxito y cuenten con nosotros desde ONU Mujeres. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias a ti. Gracias, María. Y solamente agregar a estas cifras que compartes, que son desde luego preocupantísimas, el que la enorme mayoría de los casos de abuso sexual en contra de los menores son hechos por personas cercanas a su entorno, personas de confianza, incluso familiares, ¿no? Y por eso todavía más importante el que se difunda una historia como la de Jan, porque precisamente lo que la vulneró fue la confianza que su familia tenía en esta persona que la atacó. Y bueno, pues ahí sí, el tener información, el quitarnos el velo de los ojos, el ver de cerca una historia como esta, me parece que puede darles muchas herramientas a padres de familia para proteger a sus hijos justamente de depredadores sexuales que podrían estar en el círculo cercano, incluso en el círculo íntimo de la familia y que no deben estar ahí. Alejar esos riesgos me parece que es parte de la tan importante tarea que se logra a través de esta serie A Friend of the Family. María, ¿hay algo más que quieras decir al respecto?
Felicitarlos por esta iniciativa, porque este tipo de eventos son los que van cambiando las normas sociales y van cambiando la mentalidad para que sigamos mucho más previsores y tengamos la prevención, tanto desde la familia como de los entornos, como un objetivo primordial para proteger a nuestras niñas y nuestros adolescentes. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias a ti, María Noel de ONU Mujeres. Y bueno, pues ahora saludaré a la protagonista de esta historia. I am really, it is my honor to present Jan Brober. She is the protagonist of this story. She is a survivor. She is a very brave woman, but also a very generous one, because she decided to share her story. She decided to open all this suffering for us to learn, for us to prevent. A Friend of the Family is a very important document for a lot of families to actually protect their children. So, Jan, it is my pleasure to say hello to you today. I admire you, and I really thank you for being here. Good afternoon. Vamos a enlazarnos en unos instantes con Jan Brober, protagonista de esta historia, una mujer que desde niña fue víctima de abuso sexual y bueno, pues su agresor era una persona muy cercana a su familia, un amigo cercanísimo en el que todos los integrantes de la familia confiaban y durante años abusó sexualmente de ella y digamos que la ingenuidad, pero sobre todo la falta de información de su familia fue lo que permitió que durante tantos años ella fuera lastimada de esta manera. Por fortuna tuvo el acompañamiento y la fortaleza para sanar y además pues la generosidad para compartir esta historia con todos y con ello darnos elementos para prevenir más casos de abuso sexual en contra de menores. Voy a hablar con Jan y voy a hablar también con Nick Antosca, quien, bueno, pues justamente ha llevado esta historia a una serie de 9 episodios que está espléndidamente bien contada, porque también eso es importante, ¿no? Que una serie te atrape y bueno, pues que justamente desde ahí, cuando tiene tu atención, pueda entonces compartirte todos estos mensajes tan relevantes. Está Jan, are you Jan ready? Okay, there should be something going on, maybe. Oh, there you go. Jan,
Okay. Sí, estoy
it is our
lista.
pleasure to welcome you. Estás lista. Te escuchamos entonces, dear Jan. Please tell us about all this, this generosity of yours. Thank you for sharing your story. You're such a strong woman. Thank you for that.
Gracias por todo. I'm going to speak in English, pero mi corazón es muy lleno por la gente de latinas y latinos en Latinoamérica, porque yo viví en Guatemala por unos años y tengo una esperanza que la gente que the people that see this series will be able to protect their children and will be able to see that the person who is going to harm them, abuse them, is almost always someone they know, someone in their family, in their congregation, somebody who is in the neighborhood or the sports team or the dance teacher at the school, or it's not a scary stranger, hardly ever. Cara nunca. And so my story, I wanted to tell because I knew that I had such wonderful support. My family was there for me when it was time for my healing to begin. And so I know that many are alone and they feel alone, that somebody doesn't believe them, that they can't tell their story. And I wanted the whole world to know you're not alone. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And please raise your voice so that we can understand how common abuse of children, tweens, teenagers, and the grooming, the psychology that a friend of the family shows, it will make you see things differently, see things that you didn't see before. And that's why I wanted to tell my story, because I not only survived, but I was able to thrive and heal because of my support system, my family, many good therapists, good books, watching certain programs, doing a lot of my own work on the healing process. But I want others to know their story matters. You matter. It wasn't your fault. That's why I wanted to tell my story, and I hope it will help millions of people around the world and all of mis amigos y amigas in Latin America, because I have a lot of friends in Guatemala, in Mexico, in El Salvador. I have friends there, and I love them, and in Brazil. Also, I have a big community of people who have found me and who will share with me their stories, and I just want them to know there is hope, there is healing, and that this is real and it is rampant. It is everywhere. 1 in 3 girls in the United States, and I believe that is a global number, and 1 in 4 boys will be sexually abused or assaulted by someone they know before the age of 18. Horrible, much worse than the pandemic we just went through, much worse than cancer and heart disease put together. I told my story to make a difference. And the way Peacock and the team and Nick and his team put the story together, it's all true. And it is so well done. It's like true crime done right. And you will not be able to take your eyes off of the series. And it's nothing graphic. You won't have to look at abuse. You won't have to look at violence. You will see the psychology. You will see it all without having it be a graphic portrayal, which I really appreciated. So none of our young actors were harmed or in any way psychologically. And you'll get it. You'll get the story and you'll see something that you didn't see before. And for me, just knowing that it's almost never a stranger, it's almost always someone you know, and that the groomer, the predator, the master manipulator, he grooms everybody, not just the child, but the parents, the congregation, the business community. Everybody loved him and thought he was totally harmless. No one ever saw it coming. And I wasn't the first. There were 2 girls before me that I know of, and I wasn't the last. There were 5 girls after me that I know of, and they are usually serial in their predation, in the predatory behavior of pedophilia. It is serial. It happens over and over again, and they just look for a vulnerable target and vulnerable people that love and are open-armed and very kind and nice, and then they abuse that. They use that to get in there and to do things that you never would have thought were possible. My family never knew that anyone like this could exist in the world, this kind of evil.
But I really want to thank you, Jan. It is very moving. I watched the 9 episodes this weekend, and all I want to say is thank you, because after what you went through, it is very important that you have the strength to share it. Now that I hear you and I see you, I can tell that you don't only have a very strong heart, but a very beautiful one. And I understand that your generosity comes from there, from love, and from this, from this willing of yours to help other kids, to save other kids. I was saying at the beginning that this story of yours, especially the way it is shared by Nick Antosca, it can transform us, but it can also save a lot of children. Has it been part of your healing process to share your story?
Yes, absolutely. I really felt like the first time that I shared it with a little book club, I was working at Disney World, singing and dancing and acting. It was my first professional job. And my son was actually born in Orlando, Florida, at Disney World, at the hospital there. And I had another entertainer friend who had a book club of just single girls. We were all performers. And she said, come tell your story. And I said, oh, I don't have a book. I don't have anything to say. And she said, no, tell your story because it helped me. And I swear, we want you to do it. And when I took my little brand new baby, he had just been born, and took him to this little gathering of about 12 girls, young women who were performers, singers, dancers. And I told my story. They asked such important questions. And I realized, oh, I do have something to say. I know things because of my experience, my lived experience, that other people don't know. They think this only happens from strangers. They think it's a stranger that does this. It's not. It's almost always somebody in the family or close to the family that is manipulating and laying the groundwork and really going to blackmail people into, doing things that they otherwise wouldn't do. And they're going to get their way with the children there. And then they don't know it. Or if their child or their tween or their teenager tries to tell them, they don't believe them. Well, that's impossible. That's grandpa. We don't believe you. We don't talk about those things in our family. That stigma does more harm for abuse continuing for that child, that tween, that teenager. They will most likely be abused over and over and over again throughout their life because they weren't believed and because nothing happened to help them heal. I had the opportunity to tell my story. And that first time I did it, I felt like, oh my gosh, I feel lighter. And every time I get to tell it, now it's almost like I'm telling somebody else's story. I've done it so often that I am not triggered by my story. I just know my story is powerful enough that people will watch it and they will learn something from it. And hopefully it will prevent abuse, or those who have been harmed will know they can heal. I am the hope for that. I am the hope for healing. And I am also the hope for prevention. And we have to be educated, and we have to be willing to talk about these things. Another woman who's a famous, movie star over here did an article about her abuse recently. And she said, when people talk about abuse, like we talk about cancer, we can get somewhere in solving the issue as long as it's a secret and you feel ashamed when you shouldn't be ashamed. It wasn't your fault. You didn't do this. Then when we talk, then when we get it outside of our bodies, we can heal. And in that healing, we will prevent it from passing on to the next generation. We will prevent the cycle from continuing, and we'll be able to know what we're looking for so we can stop it and prevent it.
And you're right. Your story is a very powerful one. But I think you agree when I say that the way it is told in A Friend of the Family adds even more power to it, right?
Absolutely. Because there's something about media, right? We can see it. We can almost touch it, and we can almost taste it because we're right there with them. And because you will relate to one of the characters, if not many of the characters in my story, whether you're a mother, a father, a child, a sibling, a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, whether you're anybody that ever has had the opportunity to know someone who has survived sexual assault will learn so much from just watching the story of how do I listen? How do I believe the person with empathy so that I can help them heal and not be a stumbling block to their healing because I raised my eyebrows, or what were you wearing? Or I don't really believe you. Or, well, that's not possible. He got Teacher of the Year last year. Or, well, he's the leading attorney in town. Or, well, he's the priest. We have to believe victims, and then they will become survivors. And then with hope and healing and funding the right things, we can help them heal so that they are thriving, and they will help prevent this from happening to the next generation. That's the way it works.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan. And we'll keep that, of course, in mind. If the abuser is someone close to the family,
yes,
we've got to always, information can prevent it and can make the difference. So we've got to listen.
And there's nothing. And there's nothing like watching the information in a compelling, entertaining 9-part series that's so well done with fantastic Academy Award-winning actors, people that are so good in the roles. It was when my mother was sitting in the audience at the premiere in New York, she kept pointing at the screen, there's Bobby, like my dad, and Colin Hanks, who played my father in the 9-part series, was sitting behind us with his wife, and he came up afterwards. He was like, oh, that was so thrilling because your mom kept thinking I was Bobby. I was dad, and they were all so good. When I watched myself in McKenna Grace and Hendrix Yancey, who just won Best Supporting Actress for her role in A Friend of the Family from the Young Academy or Emmy Awards or whatever it's called for the young people. She just won for this role that she did in A Friend of the Family as young Jan. I watched myself. They were so good. It was so amazing to watch and to go, oh my gosh, Nick and the team, they did it right. They told the truth. They didn't have to embellish it. They didn't have to make it more crazy or more violent or more sexual. They just told the truth. And it is so well done that it has made me so proud that I could be a part of it, that I could help produce. I could be in the writer's room. I could make little suggestions like, oh, I think that's too easy. He was pretty tricky. Don't make it too easy because people don't see it. They don't see it in their family member or their best friend or their priest or their, coach or their school teacher. They're not going to see it. They're only going to see what the predator wants them to see. Oh, I'm this wonderful community person, wonderful church person, and I'm married and I have 5 kids. and I'm the worst predator you could ever see without seeing me, because I don't have horns on my head. I don't have a sign that says I'm going to rape your child. In just a few years, I'll become best friends with you first. And then 3 years after we've become best friends, our families do everything together, hundreds of activities. Then I'm going to kidnap, brainwash, and rape your daughter for years and years. They don't look like that. They look like your best friend.
Of course, and that's why they keep going, and that's why we need more and more information to actually be able to stop them. Please let me now introduce the person who made this possible with such a great quality. I mean, you've described his work in a great way, so I think that's the best way to introduce the executive producer of A Friend of the Family, Nick Antosca. Nick, first, let me say congratulations. You did an excellent job. Yes, you had a great story to tell, but the way you did it was perfect. Congratulations.
Thank
How
you
are
so
you?
much. I'm good. I'm very proud to be here and help tell this story. As always with Jan, we've done a lot of press together over the last 2 years.
Yeah, a couple
Always
years
good.
now.
Tell us, Nick, a little about the process. Why did you choose this story, and how did it all happen?
It always starts with curiosity and humanity. I heard the story the way most people did. There was a documentary, and I found the story just really deeply haunting. And I found myself wondering how this could have happened. And so I read the book that Jan and her mom wrote. And when I read the book, I started to have a deeper understanding and still more curiosity. And I think people reacted when they initially heard the story. When you hear it in a 90-minute documentary and there are so many shocking things, you react with judgment sometimes. And you react by saying, how could somebody have made these decisions and let this happen? But when you start to get closer to the story and you think about it more, you understand it better from a human level, and it becomes relatable because we all have vulnerabilities. And if somebody knows us really well and understands those vulnerabilities, they can be exploited. And that's true for every single one of us. It may not be in exactly the same way, but we're all human. And the other thing that really drew me to the story was, as harrowing and as disturbing as it is ultimately a story about a family overcoming something. They go through an extraordinary, terrifying experience, but the same values that this man used to manipulate them are the values that allowed them to overcome what happened to them. And I felt that was very, very powerful.
It is not easy to talk about sexual abuse. It is something that a lot of people don't want to know about. As a journalist, for me, it is hard sometimes when I interview victims, I can tell that the audience leaves when we have the levels of audience. But the way you tell this story makes a big difference, because it helps us love Jan and connect with her and with her family and her reality. And I think that's a very smart, but also a very powerful way to share the message. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, of course. In telling this story, we wanted to be very sensitive, first of all. We wanted to tell it honestly, and we wanted to make sure that we were avoiding anything gratuitous. And even before that, of course, we wanted to talk to Jan and make sure that we were doing this hand in hand as a partnership, and that this was a story that she wanted told. We would never have taken the first step down the road if it wasn't in that kind of collaboration. But to your question, the story it involves themes of sexual abuse, but it's also about how people were psychologically able to not see it for so long. And And it's also about the fullness of this family's lives as they experienced it. And showing that context is really important to understanding how it happened.
Yeah, and I have to say the storytelling is amazing. I just couldn't stop. Like you kept us there, which is also very well. It defines, of course, your job. I mean, I can imagine that you're very satisfied with the results.
Thank you. I am. I will also say, as Jan said, we really didn't embellish or invent anything. You have to combine a few things in terms of the calendar when you're adapting a true story, but it's pretty close to everything that we could find, that we could document. And because Jan was so involved, we had the kind of resources that you dream of having when you're telling a true story. First of all, obviously we had Jan, so we would talk constantly. Jan, as she said, came into the writer's room. Jan was on set. Marianne was on set. We talked to her sisters. They also gave us an extraordinary amount of access to their childhood, their lives. We had boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff. We brought trucks of furniture and clothes and stuff to where we were shooting so that everybody, heads of department, the costumers, the production designer, could see and use the exact things from their childhood. We had the notes that Bea sent her. We had the diaries from the girls. So it really felt very rich, at least to me as a storyteller. There was so much stuff. And there was never a moment where we had to go, okay, we need to make this more dramatic. The story is so dramatic. It's so intense, harrowing. And so we just tried to tell the real things that happened in a dramatically compelling way. And of course, we also we depend on the cast so much. So this key cast, I think them having access to Jan and to all this research material was just invaluable.
Well, yeah, the acting is amazing. The direction, of course, as well. One last question, Nick. What did you learn from all this process? And I'm not only asking you as a producer or a storyteller, a writer, as a human.
I learned a lot of things. First and foremost, one thing that I went into it hoping that I would have a greater access to and that I felt even more strongly was about the strength of the human spirit and of the family. I mean, of a strong family and the support that this family had for each other, despite what they went through and despite the mistakes that they made, really deeply affected me. It affected me to tell the story and help tell the story. It also affected me to see it today in the present with Jan and her sisters and her mom and everything that they went through and the strength that they still have.
Well, thank you both very much. It is now the time for my colleagues to make some questions as well. So are we ready for that? I know that there's a lot of people interested in sharing some questions with you. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Paola. We'll start with the first journalist from Colombia, NTN 24, Alfonso Diaz. Go ahead with your question. Thank you.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for this. Jan, I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate the fact that you are sharing your story with us in this format. And this is my question. Back then in the 70s, we were a more trusting society, and neighbors were part of the family. However, when one watches the series now in this world we live currently in, it is unavoidable to question how your parents allow this horrible thing happen to you, not once, but twice. So how did you find understanding and forgiveness?
So first of all, I think it's really important to relate back to maybe you. Do you have a best friend? Do you have a favorite uncle?
Mm-hmm.
Are you close to your grandfather?
Mm-hmm.
We're one of those people that you found out had harmed your child or your brother or sister or something like that, how devastating would that be? First and foremost, you have to imagine that, because that's how close we were to this family, not just to B, but to his wife, Gail. I still have ceramics that she taught me how to paint. I still have them. I still use her chocolate chip cookie recipe for the best chocolate chip cookies I've ever made. I have these things. We were so close. So what I think I can say is I knew how good my parents were, how they raised us to love everyone, to have kindness, to do service, to be grateful. It was part of my DNA. So partly I was able to forgive them because I knew he was a master predator who we never saw coming, and they didn't either. They thought he was their best friend. He felt like the favorite uncle. We were so close. It was 2.5 years of 2 or 3 times a week doing activities with this family. His oldest son, Jerry, I write in my little diary that he was the first boy that ever held my hand as we walked to the park, and he swung me on the swings. So there was so much innocence in my parents and in myself and in our world that we lived in, which maybe there's not as much innocence in the world today, like you started with. However, there are people in your life that someday you will find out someone in your immediate circle, your family, if you don't know somebody already, which I bet you do, someone was harmed, and it wasn't by a stranger. It was by someone they knew, probably already trusted, and everybody loved. And you just didn't know it. You didn't see it. That's why I wanted to tell a story, and that's why I'm so grateful that I had a master storyteller like Nick to help me do it. Because I remember for years thinking, I'll never find somebody that can tell this story. They won't get it. They'll never get it. And yet this is happening to millions and millions and millions of people. There's approximately 2 billion people around the globe who have either been abused and are walking around as adults, carrying that harm and that trauma, and then another billion that are being abused right now, that are children, tweens, teens, or young adults, plus all of the rape of, grown people, men and women. And I think until we actually talk about it and we actually see it happening in our own communities, our own congregations, and our own families, and then talk about it and don't shush it and don't sweep it under the rug and don't put our head in the sand, it will continue. The numbers will continue to grow, and that makes me sick, and I want to stop it. So I'm here to cheer on not only this story, but everybody's story. Open your mouths. Let's start a movement. Let's make this stop.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alfonso. We'll move with the next question. This time is for Brazil. Ju Cassini, go ahead with your question.
Hi, Jan. So nice to meet you. I wanted to ask you, because we know that many people don't believe in the importance of true crime shows to raise awareness among these important themes. So as a survivor, can you tell us how this series based on your story can be important in alerting people this way?
I do think my story is first and foremost a cautionary tale. Like, this does happen to normal families who are going to work, going to church on Sunday, playing in the neighborhood at night with the soccer ball. We were doing those things. We were just as normal as you would look at any family that you can see all over Brazil. We want the same things. We want happiness. We want enough work to raise, and have a home and have enough food on the table. And we want to be close with our families. So I think showing my story is so relatable, because I don't think all true crime is done right. I think sometimes true crime is shocking and people are like, but it doesn't move the needle because it isn't telling the full story so that people can see how this could happen to them. And yet, a friend of the family, you can see it. You will experience that moment of, oh my word, this could happen to me. This could be someone I know. or this did happen to me, and it was someone that I know who is still showing up at the family reunion and we're having potato salad together. And they probably went on to the next young person and nobody's done anything about it. So I think that's why, for me, it's so important to tell the story in this way, because it's relatable and you won't want to turn off the TV. It will not be anything that you can't handle. So don't think that, because it's really important that you watch all 9 episodes. Really important. Yeah.
And I would love to just say something, Julie, about your question about true crime. I think that the tools of fiction applied to truth can sometimes make it feel more emotionally true or accessible to an audience. And the things that we thought about as inspirations in terms of style for this show are things like Heavenly Creatures or Boys Don't Cry. And those are stories where you're telling true human stories, but there is a poetry and an artistry and a humanity to it. Whereas the phrase true crime sometimes gets an exploitative association. We tried to do something that was very empathetic.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for joining. Moving on to the next one. This time is for Mexico. Uno TV, Liliana Sotelo. Go ahead with your question. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Mi pregunta es para Jan, si nos podría decir cómo logró que uno de los momentos más duros de su vida se convirtiera.
Liliana recuerda que debe ser en inglés. Thank you so much.
Ok, como estaba el intérprete, pero ahorita la...
I understood what you said. You started to ask me what were some of the hardest times, some of the most difficult, the most duro, right?
Yeah, becomes into a strength and even a purpose to help others.
Absolutely. For me, some of the hardest things were the people that didn't believe me. I didn't expect that. I was telling my truth. I was telling the honesty of what happened. My parents were so honest. They were so vulnerable in telling the truth, the whole truth. Almost everyone, I believe, Liliana, has something that they would rather the whole world doesn't know about. We've all made mistakes. We're human, right? We are not gods. We are human, and we make mistakes. My parents made mistakes, and they felt terrible about those mistakes for the rest of their lives. My father, I swear, died feeling like he hoped that God would forgive him for what he had not known and didn't see, even though I tried to tell him, Dad, he was a master manipulator. You didn't know. You did something that you wouldn't have done otherwise. He manipulated you. But it's hard for people, once they've made a mistake, to forgive themselves. And so for me, taking this story forward with such vulnerable, honest truth was one of the hardest things when it came back, like, oh, your parents knew. Oh, you were so stupid. How could anybody at 12 years old believe in aliens? They didn't understand the grooming. They didn't understand how this happens to millions and even billions of people around the world, because you're too scared, or you think it's real, or you don't have enough intelligence yet. You're young, or you're innocent. You haven't ever encountered somebody that would do something like this. You don't know. And my parents didn't know. And yet we told it honestly. The hardest thing for me was not being believed. That's why I started a foundation with an online community, and the whole thing is about be believed. Come here. If nobody else believed you, we will believe you. Come and join our community, because it's so important to a survivor. So that was the hardest thing. The second hardest thing was probably, how do I tell the story in a way that people will understand it? And I really never felt that I got that until I got Nick and Alex called me on the phone and asked how we were doing as a family, and if we were surviving all of the chatter, and asked about us. And that moment that I heard their voices and they asked that question, I was like, oh, people I think I could trust. And not only have I come to love them, I trust them. And they did the job that I didn't think anyone could do. That was the other hardest thing, was how do I take my story to somebody that'll actually know how to tell it truthfully so that others will understand and relate. And that happened in a friend of the family.
Wonderful, Jan.
Thanks.
Many thanks for that powerful message. Now moving on with La Nación from Argentina, Mariano Adolfo. Go ahead with your question, please. Thank you.
Hi, Jan. Well, you were talking about your parents, and I wanted to ask you about them. Particularly, how was the healing process within the family? For example, did you speak a lot about this with your family, with your parents? Did you avoid speaking about it?
You know, it's so funny because I grew up in a family where dinner time was like sacred. It was like church. Like we did it every day together as a family around the dinner table without fail. And mom, dad, and three little girls talked, communicated, told them how we were doing at school. If we were having a problem with a friend, we had a very open, loving, communicative family, and we had dinner together around the table. So when people say, what do I do to protect my kids? I'm like, well, you can start with putting the phones away, shutting down the computers, and sit down and share a meal every day with your children and listen to them. So that was what had set me up to be able to come back to my family and talk about things as I was ready to talk about them. They never pressured me when I told them kind of what had happened in big chunks, but never talking about the sexual abuse or the rape at all. I just didn't want to say those words. I didn't even know how to say those words. And they just listened, and they never defended themselves. Here's the trick for any parent out there. They never defended themselves. They said, we made so many mistakes. We didn't know. We're so sorry. That's the kind of parents that you need if you're going to survive sexual abuse as a child. Because I didn't develop into a young woman until I was 17 years old. I graduated from high school and I was only 95 pounds and 5'1" tall. I was just barely starting to go through puberty. So my parents knew how to just listen when I was ready to talk. And a lot of what we talked about didn't happen until much later. I mean, we talked a little bit, and yes, there was healing in that. And I went on with college, and I'm a big overachiever. I'm a very type A personality, and went on with life and got married and divorced and married and divorced and married and divorced. I had problems that were based in the trauma that I had been through, but I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know what to do about it. And mom and dad were always there for me. Do you need some money to go to a new therapist? Is there something, some books, or do you want to sit and talk? My mom started writing our history of what happened when I was in my older, 40s. And that's about the time when all of a sudden in my early 40s, we had this 800 pages of mom interviewing me and her talking a lot, just her and I. And somebody said, you should make this into a book and tell the whole world. And we were like, oh, really? Do you think they'd like that? We didn't even know that that's what we would do. And eventually we did self-publish our first book. And now we have our other book that has all the details in it. And that's how it happened. And it was over time. I knew that my father and my sister Karen were not ready to tell our story to the world. When I first had an offer from Lifetime, I think, was the first time that somebody I knew took it to someone there. And they kind of wanted the story. And I don't think my dad and my sister Karen were ready yet. So we didn't do it. And they never produced anything anyway. And I'm so glad, because it wasn't the right time. This was the right time and the right people. So I look back and I just kind of say, you know what? For me, I had the perfect scenario of support people. And that was my parents and my sisters and my best friends. And then I had a lot of good therapists along the way. But we did talk about it a lot in these recent years. But many details, none of us really knew until after the documentary came out and we saw each other's interviews, because we weren't in the room when various people were being interviewed. And then we talked a lot further about details that had happened. So, yeah, interesting, huh?
Wonderful, Jan. Many thanks for that. Now moving on to the next one, Maribel Ramos from Produ Latam. Go ahead with your question. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I watched the series here in the US, and it's very compelling, it's very moving. And some of the questions that I have, I think you already answered it, but anyhow, I'm going to ask you, especially to Nick, what do you think this content will connect with the audience in Latin America? And what elements are present for the audience to feel identified with this case and this miniseries?
Go
ahead, Nick.
Go for it, Jane.
No, I just wanted to say one thing is for sure, I know that Latin America loves their families. My friends that are in these countries, they are all about family. And you want to protect your family. You love your families. And that to me was the greatest reason why this is the perfect show to come to Latin America, because we want to root out the predators, the abusers, and we want to make sure that the healing happens for those that have been harmed. And we cannot sweep it under the rug and say, oh, shush, we don't talk about that. That's the wrong thing to do. And I think that that has been a stigma in America, in Latin America, pretty much around the world, and we are trying to blow the roof off of that. We do tell our stories and we are believed, and then we take action. Go ahead, Nick.
Yo, what you said is exactly right. Exactly true. This is a deeply universal story. And I feel like audiences in Latin America can profoundly relate to the theme of family, wanting to protect your family, fearing the vulnerability in your family. And that's why I really believe that it's going to resonate.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jan.
Yes.
Thank you.
And there's a power hierarchy too that I think everyone is starting to push against. Like that just because that person was in power, you know, they're the head of the family or they're the head of the church or they're the head of the school or the community center or whatever, the coach, we still have to tell the truth and be heard that these stories are real because it's often someone in a position of authority or power. And I think that resonates also in all over Latin America and Brazil for sure.
Thank you.
Amazing, Jan. Thank you, Maribel. And now moving on with the last question, this time for Diario Hoy Argentina, Milan Gross Amondaray. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Hi, Nick. Hi, Jan. It's a pleasure talking to you both. My question is, what kind of work did you do together to bring back this powerful story?
Well, we spoke to each other extensively for years. It began with many conversations, and it began during the pandemic when we were apart. And so we talked over the phone a lot. We Zoomed. When we started the writer's room, Jan would come into the writer's room via Zoom often and talk to the writer's room. We'd have all these questions and we would talk for hours. I went to visit Jan at home in person with my producing partner, Alex, and we met Marianne. We met both of Jan's sisters. So it was just a long and very meaningful process of understanding the just really getting the texture of your family's life.
Yeah, and it was so much fun to have them come because we got to take them everywhere from hiking in the beautiful Red Rock Mountains to church on Sunday. And believe me, when you walk into a Mormon church and you got these producers in their black shirts and jeans and their high top tennis shoes, it doesn't look like everybody at church. It was really fun, but they could see how we live, what we believe, how we interact with each other. And you know, we really are pretty normal. I don't know, Nick, would you say? Yes.
Yeah, very.
But it's kind of hard to believe sometimes when you hear such a crazy story, which is all true, in a friend of the family, you kind of go, did those people survive? We did. And because we had so many of those family things in place that were so important. And so I think that's a really nice question. It was really wonderful. And I feel like they're dear, dear friends to this day. And I hope to work with them again someday. So it's just been an amazing friendship.
Likewise, it's been a very, very meaningful and lasting friendship and relationship. I know that was supposed to be the last question, but I see this one in the comments here. Jan, do you want to say what was it like for you to act in the show?
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay. I must not have that open. I was so hopeful that something like that could happen, and of course trying to be very tasteful and not, get out of my place and my lane. I remember saying one time to Nick, I'd really like to do something in the show. And he's like, oh, just hold on, just wait. There'll be some, I just have a feeling. And then the day that they said, I think you should be the therapist to yourself and to your father, to Colin. You will be the therapist in these two scenes. And that was all a real person. I remember her. It was this woman, and she made me draw the pictures. The pictures were real. Everything about that final episode was so right on. And it was such a full circle moment for me because I got to be the authority that said to young Jan, to McKenna Grace, and look at her like I was looking at myself and say, you are going to be okay. You are going to survive. You are going to thrive, and your story is going to help millions of other people. So just get through it and know you've got it in you to make it through. And then I could say that to my dad. Your little girl, your daughter she's going to be okay. And it was so powerful. Even before we shot the scene, Colin Hanks, and we were standing there talking, Nick and Colin and me, and I don't remember who else. And somebody came up to him and he put his hand out and he said, "Hello, doctor." And I went, "Why did you do that?" And he's like, "Well, we do that. I don't know, something we do with my friends. We say, 'Hello, doctor.'" I'm like, my dad said that to every boy that showed up at the door to take me on a date. He would put his hand out and say, "Hello, doctor." And so going into that scene, I felt like my dad was right there. He was really there. He was on the set. So it was incredible for me. And it was a full circle moment where I could be the big Jan embracing the little Jan and that little girl and saying, "You made it through. You're okay. I got you."
Yeah, and we were shooting during COVID, and the schedule was all crazy, and Jan was in Europe, and we were trying to get her back and on the plane, and so we were freaking out a little bit, like, is she going to be able to do this? Are we going to be able to? So when that moment came to be, that was one thing that I will always remember from filming this show and telling the story is seeing Jan there. And everybody on the set could feel it. Everybody was watching this scene with kind of tears in our eyes.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Yes, and it is beautiful now that you share it with us. Thank you. Thank you for sharing these, call them magical or blessed moments. Well, I do want to say thank you to everybody today. Thank you, of course, Nick and Jan, for your time. Thank you for moving us. Thank you for putting your heart in this effort. I really love the result. Nick, you tell the story in such a way, as I mentioned before, that you really make us connect emotionally. So, Jan, I do feel like I love you now. I wish I could hug you. Will I do it from here?
Okay, we'll do it from here. Because that's what I feel like. I want to come to everywhere I can and just hug people, because I always know when I have a fellow survivor nearby, or they give me a little whisper in my ear and tell me a little bit about their story. And I feel like I can tell somebody now, and thank you. And I just want to hug people too and be hugged. So thank you.
Well, we actually felt and received that hug from distance. So thank you both very much. Thank you, of course, everybody, all the friends from the press. Muchísimas gracias a todos los colegas de la prensa de los diferentes países de Latinoamérica. Obrigada con todos os amigos do Brasil também. And I hope we get together soon with more to share. But this was amazing. Before we say goodbye, before we leave, let me please share with you. Nos despedimos precisamente con el teaser de la serie A Friend of the Family. Soy Paola Rojas y les agradezco a cada uno su tiempo, su atención y su compañía el día de hoy.
Muchas gracias.
Exactly is your relationship with Robert Birchtold?
Well, he's practically a member of the family.
Good morning, Roberts.
Good morning, Brother
baby. Good morning, Jan. It's going to be a great day. Hey, who do you love the most?
Yeah.
Tell the truth, a man like you, father, church leader, I wanted to be friends with you from the moment I met you. Really?
Okay.
I almost feel like we're two sides of the same family. I like that you were married, and sometimes I wish I had the kind of marriage you have. I think you really care about me, Broberg. Help me out, brother. No one thinks that their best friend is a monster. But he has all the hallmarks of a psychopathic personality. Happy birthday, Jan. Birchstone doesn't feel emotions the way that we do. He will lie and manipulate to get the only thing that he wants. You're not tempted. They sure are special.
Who is her father? Him or me? You? If you knew something, you would tell us, right?
Your husband kidnapped her.
Again! Where is he? Where is he?
There's no telling what he is capable of.
I love all these messages in the chat too. Thank you, everybody.
Wonderful, Jan. Thank you all for joining us. Again, in the name of Universal Plus, it's a huge honor to have you. So thank you to you, to Nick, and the whole team for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Gracias a todo. Mucho cariño.
Gracias.
Thank you. Bye.
Entrevistas, cubrimientos y mucho más aquí en Zona Captiva. Escúchanos y míranos en todas las plataformas digitales como Zona Captiva. Visítanos y síguenos en nuestras redes sociales como @Zona Captiva y en nuestra página web www.zonacaptiva.com.